Kristen Atchison here, and this is our first lecture for Chapter 3, the visual brain. We're going to be talking about the process of getting the information out of the eye and into the brain. So, neural signals travel along pathways deeper into the brain, and as they get deeper into the brain, the networks get more complex, okay? There's several characteristics of how the brain is organized and how these pathways and networks are organized. One of which is the idea of functional specialization. It's kind of what it sounds like. It's an area that is specialized for a specific function, okay? So different pathways do different things. Different areas of the brain do different things. So again, these different pathways and areas really deal with different kinds of information. So we'll talk about the dorsal pathway and the ventral pathway. They do different things. We'll talk about different areas of the brain, and they have different jobs. They have different functions. Another idea that we really need, that's important to know about how the brain is organized, especially for the visual system, is what's called renotopic mapping. And this is the idea that when those retinal ganglion cells in the visual fields, the receptive fields, in the eye are next to each other, they're also next to each other in the brain. So if they're next door, the signal is a next door neighbor in the retina, it's also a next door neighbor in the brain. So we'll see this kind of similarity in location. And this we'll see is important for different things like edge detection, contours, these sorts of things. So let's talk about some of the different anatomy in the brain coming out of the eye. So we've already talked about the eye in Chapter 2. Now we're going to talk about the brain piece of it. So the optic nerve is what comes out of the back of the eye. It comes out of the eye at the blind spot, right? That's why there's no receptors on the blind spot, is because those are the axons leaving the eye. And they meet in the optic chasm. And that basically what that is where everything gets put together and the left field goes to the right side and the right field goes to the left side. What we have in the visual system is something that's called contralateral organization. And that means that information we're getting from, in terms of vision, our left visual field will be processed by the right side of our brain. And information that we're getting from our right visual field will be processed by the left side of the brain. So in that optic chasm, things split apart, okay? And we see the signals from the right temporal area and the left nasal area. And if you think about what that means, the left nasal area is your left eye by your nose. Your right temple area will be your right eye by your temple. And those are set to the lateral geniculate nucleus in V1 for the right hemisphere. We'll see that vice versa as well. So that the left visual field will go to the right side and the right visual field will go to the left side. So if you look at this image, you can see that. So we have visual field there at the very beginning. The left is labeled red, the blue is labeled right. And it's not necessarily what eye the information goes into. It's where in the eye that information is going to. Is it on the left side of that eye or is it on the right side of that eye? And so again, that will dictate which side of the brain the information is going into. And finally, again, we'll have that the information from the left temporal area and the right nasal retina area sent to the left hemisphere. So again, we have that contralateral organization where the information from the left visual field is sent to the right side of the brain and the information from the right visual field is sent to the left side of the brain. So there's a Launchpad activity that will walk you through this, that will walk you through these different areas, and we'll talk about this contralateral organization. So the optic chasm is where the nerves from the two eyes split in half. And again, we have the neurons that are from the left visual field go into the right hemisphere, and the information that's from the right visual field go into the left hemisphere. Again, in this image, we'll see that as the left visual field will have all the red lines, and the right visual field will have all the blue lines. And that's this area right here where those two things meet, and we'll have some crossover of information. The optic tract is just that continuation of the optic nerve, is the continuation of those axons from the RGC cells. But again, they've already been split off at the optic chiasm. So we have the right half of each retina and the left goes to the left optic tract, and the left half of each retina goes to the right optic tract. And the optic tract are these areas right here. So again, after that optic chiasm, after it splits off, before we get to the lateral geniculate nucleus. And again, remember we have contralateral organization. That means that the information from the left visual field ends up at the right area of the cortex. And we will see information from the right visual field go to the left side of the brain. Now again, this is not necessarily just eyes. This is talking about visual fields. I'm not starting these arrows at the eyes. I'm starting them at the visual fields because again, both eyes are receiving information from both the left and the right visual field. And that information then splits apart in that optic chiasm, goes down the optic tracts to the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is part of the thalamus, and then into V1. So, I've already mentioned this. The lateral geniculate nucleus is again part of the thalamus, and really the most of those RGC neurons are going in there. We are going to have about 90% of them really connect to the LGN. And then from the LGN, that information gets sent to the primary visual cortex, what we call area V1 in the brain. It was used to be thought that the LGN and the thalamus was kind of just a relay station. We actually know now that that's really not just the case. And we'll talk about a study right here where they did an fMRI study and they had participants fixate on the cross. So here you see this image, that was their fixation point. Remember, when you fixate on something, that's what you're looking at. So if I'm looking at the doorknob on my office door, I'm fixating on the doorknob, okay? And then everything to the left of the doorknob would be my left visual field, and everything to the right of the doorknob would be my right visual field. So what they were told to do was fixate on this cross, but then pay attention, basically pay attention to the periphery, their peripheral vision, to either the left or the right side, to this checkerboard pattern that was on either side of the cross. And what they found is when attention was directed to the left visual field, they saw increased activity in the right LGN and the right visual cortex. So it's more than just relaying the information, it actually has activation as well. Just like you would expect then, when their attention was directed to the right visual field, there was activation in the left LGN and the left primary visual cortex. So to kind of recap everything we just said, the left and the right halves of the visual field, and that's again defined by the fixation point. So again, if you stare at, again, the doorknob, everything to the left of the doorknob would be the left visual field, and everything to the right of the doorknob would be the right visual field. If you were to change your fixation to a paperclip on your desk, everything to the left of the paperclip would be the left visual field, everything to the right of the paperclip would be the right visual field. So again, an example was from that fMRI study. The fixation point was the cross, everything to the left of the cross was the left visual field, and everything to the right of the cross was the right visual field. The LGN then receives signals from the right half of the visual field in the left LGN, and the right LGN receives information from the left half of the visual field. Again, this is that contralateral organization. Remember, contra kind of means opposite, right? So the opposite organization of the visual field. And so again, we have the thalamus, we have the right LGN and the left LGN that will receive different information from different visual fields. And again, we see this in this fMRI study. We see activation in the left LGN, and we see information activation in the right LGN as well. And then the neurons in in each layer, we'll form this renotopic map from the RGCs. So again, RGCs that are located with their receptive fields are located near each other within the eye will have activation that are near each other in the cortex as well, and in the LGN. The last part of the piece that of the brain that we want to talk about before we get to the primary visual cortex is the superior colliculus. Now, I said 90% of those RGC axons go to the LGN. Well, what happens to the other 10%? They go to the superior colliculus. So most of that other 10% really end up here. There's 2 superior colliculuses, just like there's 2 LGNs, one for each hemisphere of the brain. They're really pretty close to the top of the brainstem, and they're involved in rapid eye movements. We'll talk about that later on in a subsequent chapter. We'll kind of get into that a little bit more. But that's where that rest of that information is going, and that will really help us with attention, with eye movement, with these sorts of things. They also help you see where things are. We will talk about the different pathways, the dorsal and the ventral, the where and the what. This is the where. This is going to be an important station, an important functional module for where things are. This is not what things are. This is going to be where things are. And there's also a lot of evidence that says that the superior colliculus really might be a site in the brain that integrates information from multiple senses. So the last topic that we're going to cover in this course really is multisensory or cross-modal information, where all of that is integrated together. And there's some evidence that this is really happening for at least some of the sensory systems within the superior colliculus. So this ends our lecture about the pathways from the eye to the brain. The next video, we will talk about kind of the area of the brain, of the cortex where most of this is happening, V1. Thanks.